1991 marked the 100th anniversary of West Virginia football, and as the season began, the historical significance loomed large. But of even greater significance was the intense desire to get back to the winning ways the program and its fans became accustomed to in the decade of the 80s. Head coach Don Nehlen's young squad was older and wiser. The returnees from the previous year were now experienced in the ways of Mountaineer football. This team had felt the sting of defeat and now was ready to taste the sweet nectar of victory. Festivities and hoopla filled the air as the program entered the new Big East Football Conference. But more importantly, this young team came of age and matured. 1991 was a return to tradition. The 1991 West Virginia University football highlights are presented by United National Bank. Spring drills usually typify the apex of optimism. Off-season conditioning had prepared Don Nehlen's team in mind and body. But a terrible rash of spring injuries hit the Mountaineers, sending the coaching staff back to readjust its plans.
Believe it or not, when we finished with our spring football game, Scotty Gaskins was the only defensive lineman left on our squad that didn't need some type of surgery. He was kind of known as the Red Cross platoon.
As spring gave way to summer and then to the golden hues of autumn, the road ahead for the Mountaineers was a tough one. It started on a warm August evening in Morgantown. The second largest Mountaineer Field crowd ever was ready to view the 84th edition of the Backyard Brawl, West Virginia versus Pitt. It would be the first Big East Conference game for both schools and the first conference game nationally televised. That assembled crowd and the national ESPN audience saw West Virginia take the opening kickoff and promptly give the ball right back to the Panthers on an interception. West Virginia held and immediately drove to the Pitt 4 before settling for a Mark Johnson field goal. The Mountaineers possessed a 3-0 lead, but soon the bright hopes of a victory would be dashed. In the second quarter, sophomore quarterback Darren Studstill injured his shoulder, and backup quarterback Chris Gray took over the reins as field general. But this night and momentum belonged to the Panthers, who came away with a 34-3 victory. The one bright spot on the evening was tailback Adrian Morrell. Making his first collegiate start, Morrell raced through the Pitt defense for 75 yards and got his season off to a flying start. The defensive charge was led by linebacker Steve Grant with 13 tackles and Derek Wiley with 11. It was a successful start for Grant, who was the clear-cut leader of this defense. He led by example, and as the weeks went on, his play at linebacker was one of the best in the nation. The dark clouds of the Pitt loss were swept away under beautiful skies the next week as the Mountaineers entertained Bowling Green. Chris Gray got his first collegiate start as Studstill's shoulder injury kept him out of Game 2. And teammates certainly had their hands full, because this would be a Falcons squad that would go on to a postseason bowl and finish the year with only one defeat, that one coming at the hands of West Virginia. The first victory of the 1991 season was a gratifying one for the Mountaineers as they passed a character test early. When Bowling Green fumbled on its third play from scrimmage, it took less than a minute for WVU to capitalize on the miscue as Mark Johnson booted a 37-yard field goal. From there on, the Mountaineers found themselves in a dogfight. With the score tied 3-3, the Falcons drove 83 yards in 4 minutes to take the lead. West Virginia immediately started a drive behind the running of Adrian Morrell. Tight end John Kappa made one of the toughest receptions of the year for a touchdown. But WVU still trailed at the half 10-9 after missing the extra point. Second half action saw the Falcons take a 17-9 edge. The Mountaineers did not quit, just as in the first half, a Bowling Green score got the Mountaineers in gear. A Chris Gray to Garrett Ford pass of 31 yards was the big play of the drive that was capped off with a Rodney Woodard 1-yard plunge, pulling the Mountaineers to within 2 before Chris Gray tacked on the 2-point conversion with a super effort to tie the game at 17. The Mountaineer defense then rose to the occasion. Bowling Green tried right, tried left, and tried the middle, but to no avail. The Mountaineers regained the ball and would not be denied. Again, it was Adrian Morrell as the workhorse, hauling in a 36-yard pass before busting in from the 4 to give WVU the important victory. Morrell finished the day with an impressive 152 yards rushing, while Chris Gray had a solid first start with 175 yards passing and 1 touchdown. Grant led Mountaineer tacklers with 13, and senior defensive end Jim Gray came through with 6 big tackles. Studstill returned to quarterback for week 3, and what an important week it was as the South Carolina Gamecocks visited Mountaineer Field. Looking to avenge a 1990 Thanksgiving night defeat, West Virginia started with a fury as Studstill completed 2 third-down passes of 16 and 18 yards to senior receiver Ron Weaver. With those big catches keeping the momentum on the gold and blue sideline, Garrett Ford finished off the second drive with a 1-yard run up the middle. The Mountaineers upped their lead to 14-0 after a Studstill scamper set up Adrian Morrell's 15-yard run early in the second quarter. On the next WVU possession, receiver James Jett turned in one of the prettiest catches of the season, a leaping grab for a 21-0 halftime lead.
Studstill, short drop, firing, and Jett goes up. Jett comes down. Jett has a touchdown. Holy smokes! James Jett covered, goes into the air, pulls that ball out of the air as though he had a hook on one hand, comes down, holds on to it, a 12-yard reception.
That was all the scoring West Virginia would need as the Mountaineer defense took care of the rest in the second half, and West Virginia captured a 21-16 victory. The Mountaineers racked up 372 yards of total offense. Studstill passed for 176 yards and rushed for another 50. Weaver had one of his best days as a Mountaineer and ended the day with 3 catches for 50 yards. WVU's defense stiffened when it had to behind Steve Grant's 12 tackles, while Wes Richardson had a big afternoon with 10. Tom Briggs was once again a force on the defensive line with 2 huge quarterback sacks. His pressure kept Carolina quarterback Bobby Fuller on his heels all afternoon. The win was big as West Virginia went to 2-1 on the season, and also because the Gold and Blue hit the road the next week to face the always tough Maryland Terrapins. The early going went Maryland's way after a 62-yard drive gave them a 7-0 lead, but the Terrapins' joy was short-lived. The Mountaineer defense, behind a combined 30 tackles from Steve Grant and Wes Richardson, shut down the Maryland attack. Morrell started his best day ever with a 44-yard run. This was just the beginning.
West Virginia fans, they think that when we play Maryland, it's a barometer for the season of West Virginia. If we do well against this team, then that means that the rest of the season is going to go well for West Virginia. And when Darren pitched the ball for the first time, when I touched it and when we ran 44 yards with it, I knew that West Virginia was going to have a great day.
Darren Studstill's gutsy 4th down scamper for 11 yards kept an early drive going before his touchdown pass to Morrell tied things on the afternoon. From there, West Virginia never looked back. Another drive, another long gain from Morrell. Studstill gave the Mountaineers the lead for good on a 3-yard run. In the second quarter, Rodney Woodard made Maryland pay for 2 crucial 4th down penalties with a 6-yard bolt, and WVU had a 21-7 lead at the half. On the first play of the second half, defensive lineman Tom Briggs fell on a Maryland fumble, and part 2 of the Adrian Morrell show was set to begin. Was chopping up the Maryland soil, the Mountaineer defense kept the Terrapins at bay. Linebackers Wes Richardson and Steve Grant led a vicious defense with 15 and 14 tackles respectively and kept the Maryland offense off balance for the entire second half. Morrell's second touchdown on the day gave West Virginia a 28-7 advantage. After a Mark Johnson 24-yard field goal, defensive back David Mayfield recorded the team's first interception of the season and returned it all the way to the Maryland 2-yard line. Running back Jim Freeman finished off the scoring for the day with a 1-yard scamper, and the Mountaineers left Byrd Stadium with a satisfying 37-7 victory. After a week off, the Mountaineers' next test was the Virginia Tech Hokies on homecoming day in Morgantown. The day had dawned bright, but the clouds rolled in and rain fell for most of the game. Early on, a Boris Graham fumble recovery almost led to the first WVU touchdown on the day, but Adrian Morrell was ruled ahead of Darren Studstill on the pitch. With Tech then driving, Wes Richardson and Tom Briggs combined to stop the Hokies on a fourth down play that fired up the Mountaineer Field faithful. Still on its next possession, Tech took a 7-0 lead before Tom Briggs recovered a Tech fumble to set up Morrell for his 4-yard run that tied the score at 7-7. Just like lightning, Virginia Tech scored quickly once again to take a 14-7 halftime lead and up that mark to 20-7 midway through the third quarter. With the heavy rains affecting both teams' play, Chris Gray was brought on at quarterback in hopes of providing some spark. That he did. This 91 Mountaineer squad did not know the meaning of the word quit. After a 19-yard pass to Rodney Woodard kept the momentum going, Morrell displayed some nifty moves en route to the end zone, and the Mountaineers trailed only 20-14. However, in one of the strangest events in 100 years of Mountaineer football, WVU's momentum was broken, not by the opponent, but at the end of the third quarter, when a 50-minute lightning delay forced both teams to leave the field for safety precautions.
We finally got some momentum, scored a touchdown. All of a sudden, the lightning and thunder came. The officials called the game, and we sat in the locker room for a total of 50 minutes, which really took the edge off the football game.
When the fourth quarter finally got underway, the momentum generated by WVU was lost. But the Mountaineers had one last try for victory. Receiver Michael Beasley made an awesome catch on fourth down, and Michael Baker outreached a defender for the next pass. Just when it seemed like this long homecoming day could end in celebration, a Tech lineman reached out and grabbed victory away from the Mountaineers. The Temple Owls were next on the Mountaineers' dance card. The first half was a frustrating one for WVU as the offense moved the ball but could not get into the end zone. The defense behind the hard hitting of Steve Grant and Mike Collins held on several occasions, including a key goal line stand. But Temple still had the Mountaineer faithful worried with a 9-0 lead in the fourth quarter. The Mountaineers needed something to happen fast, and Michael Beasley delivered the big play.
Toss, Beasley. The Owls have it red. James Harris has Beasley. He'll try to bring it back. He breaks through. Here comes Beasley. Open field ahead. He will go all the way. Touchdown, West Virginia, 63 yards. Absolutely incredible play by Michael Beasley.
The game could be compared to a prize fight that ended in a flurry of punches. After WVU held the Owls with a missed field goal and again on a Tom Briggs fumble recovery, the Mountaineers threw the knockout punch behind the running of tailbacks John Jones and Adrian Morrell, who got the last of his 102 yards rushing on the final game-winning drive. With just 37 seconds left, place kicker Mark Johnson became the hero of the day as his 21-yard field goal gave West Virginia an all-important 10-9 win. The The next week saw the Mountaineers travel north to Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts for a Big East encounter with the Boston College Eagles. West Virginia came out strong in the first stanza and drove 72 yards in 14 plays to take a 7-0 lead when quarterback Darren Studstill converted on a 4-yard scamper. However, the Eagles had the hometown crowd fired up, and they took a 10-7 lead into the locker room at halftime. The second half saw the teams trade scores for the entire 30 minutes in one of the most exciting games of the season. After a Mark Johnson 28-yard field goal tied the score at 10-10, the Eagles went up 17-10 midway through the third quarter. West Virginia answered back when tight end Alex Shook would not be denied and clawed his way into the end zone for an 11-yard score. Trailing 24-17 midway through the fourth quarter, West Virginia answered with great poise by driving 80 yards in 14 plays, capped off by a 14-yard touchdown pass from Studstill to fullback Rodney Woodard. However, West Virginia would not go home with a tie on this day and made the most of its last possession. With only 90 seconds left in the game, the Mountaineers started on their own 28-yard line and 6 plays later found themselves in the end zone once again when Studstill completed a beautiful 40-yard bomb to Michael Beasley that gave West Virginia the lead for good at 31-24. Begging for a comeback, the Eagle fans tried to rally their troops in the final 24 seconds. The WVU defense had the tough task of stopping the Eagles' aerial attack once again and was anchored by Steve Grant, who, along with fellow linebacker Puppy Wright, recorded 10 tackles on the afternoon. On the final play of the game, defensive back Tim Newsome tackled Michael Campbell on the 1-yard line. The Eagles stood in disbelief as the Mountaineers celebrated their 5th victory of the season. West Virginia traveled to Penn State the following week for its last scheduled game in Happy Valley. The Mountaineers had high hopes on this final visit to Beaver Stadium, but they were not to be. The day belonged to Penn State. A 32-yard touchdown strike from Darren Studstill to Michael Beasley in the second quarter was the only score for the Mountaineers as Penn State started strong and kept the momentum going throughout the game, finishing with a 51-6 victory. It just wasn't West Virginia's day. But there were a few bright spots. Punter Mike Vanderjagt punted 8 times for 357 yards and an impressive 44.6 average. Vanderjagt even showed his versatility with an 18-yard pass to Tim Newsome on this fake punt in the second quarter. The Mountaineer defense was plagued by injuries, but Steve Grant still led the way with 8 tackles, while Newsome added 7 in the effort. Injuries were critical to the team as Nealon and his staff constantly had to fill holes and patch lineups together. The challenge was stiff after the Penn State contest, but the coaches and the players were up for it when Week 9 brought the Rutgers Scarlet Knights to Mountaineer Field. The mood was both happy and sad on this November day. Sad because the home fans were saying goodbye to 15 Mountaineer seniors who had given the program 5 years of hard work and effort. But the seniors were given a great going-away present in victory number 6, giving Don Nealon his 9th winning season at West Virginia. Trailing in the second quarter, the West Virginia offense brought the Mountaineer Field crowd to its feet with a dazzling 53-yard touchdown strike from Darren Studstill to speedster James Jett. The Mountaineers took a 7-3 advantage and rolled the rest of the afternoon. An Adrian Morrell 12-yard scamper gave WVU a 14-3 halftime lead before 2 more scores in the final period gave West Virginia its 7th straight win over the Scarlet Knights. Fullback Jim Freeman got into the scoring column with a 1-yard touchdown, while tight end Alex Shook closed out the scoring at Mountaineer Field for 1991 with a 15-yard reception from Studstill. Against Rutgers, Shook caught 3 of Darren Studstill's 11 completions as the sophomore quarterback finished with 197 yards passing and 76 yards rushing. The Mountaineer defense held the Scarlet Knights to just 222 yards of total offense as defensive backs Leroy Axum and Darrell Whitmore each recorded an interception in the game. With the home schedule over, the Mountaineers had 2 road games remaining. The first took them to sunny Florida for a date with the second-ranked Miami Hurricanes. The site was the famed Orange Bowl, and the 60,250 fans in attendance were given an early warning that the Hurricanes were in for a dogfight. The Mountaineer defense fought and clawed all day as Florida native Steve Grant, Leroy Axum, Kwame Smith, and Puppy Wright showed the home team what West Virginia football was all about. The high-powered Miami offense was held scoreless in the first quarter and did not get on the board until 5 minutes remained in the second. With the Hurricanes leading 10-0 in the final minutes of the first half, kicker Mark Johnson put West Virginia on the board with a 35-yard field goal. At the end of the half, West Virginia trailed only 10-3 and gave the nation's second-ranked team all it wanted in a football game. The Mountaineers continued to battle in the second half. The costly turnovers gave the Hurricanes second chances that they eventually cashed in. The final score read 27-3 in favor of Miami, but the game was much closer than the scoreboard showed. The Mountaineers had a lot to be proud of, especially the defense. Behind Tom Briggs with 14 big tackles, along with Steve Grant and Leroy Axum, who contributed 10 each, the Mountaineers never gave up the fight. And Kwame Smith pulled in one of the toughest interceptions of the year with another great effort. No, it was not a victory for West Virginia, but the Mountaineers left the Sunshine State feeling good about themselves. The record was 6-4 with 1 game left, and the Mountaineers were riding high with confidence after a strong showing in the Orange Bowl. The final game had the Mountaineers traveling to the Carrier Dome for a matchup with bowl-bound Syracuse. An ESPN national audience was treated to a barn burner that went right down to the final minute. With the score tied at 3-3, West Virginia put together an impressive 9-play, 80-yard drive that would take them in for the go-ahead score at the half. Quarterback Darren Studstill ran for 30 yards to keep the drive alive, and James Jett caught a big 36-yard pass from Studstill to set up Adrian Morrell's 1-yard run. What a day Morrell had. He showed the nation why he led the Big East in rushing for most of the season, finishing with 116 yards on 16 carries. Even though he finished second in league rushing, Morrell let everyone know with his performance against the Orange Men that he would be a force to reckon with once again in 1992. His performance gave West Virginia a 10-6 halftime lead that would hold until the fourth quarter, thanks to a fired-up Mountaineer defense that held the explosive Orangeman attack to just 84 yards passing on the day. There certainly wasn't any quit in this Mountaineer team. Despite trailing 16-10 with just 2:03 left in the season, West Virginia started a drive at its own 20 that had the Syracuse fans nervous until the very end. Morrell took a Studstill pass and moved it 16 yards upfield before Michael Baker added 10 more in another completion from Studstill. Alex Shook was a big play guy all year. Today wasn't any different, as his 28-yard reception brought the Mountaineers inside the Syracuse 25-yard line. What seemed like a come-from-behind victory was spoiled when Tim Sandquist stepped in front of a Studstill pass at the 3-yard line. In keeping with the season's trend in WVU's 5 losses, 1 or 2 plays spelled doom for the Mountaineers and decided the game's final outcome. Defensively, Steve Grant once again led by example with 13 stops. Grant has been a mainstay in the Mountaineer defense for the past 4 years. He played his last game in a Mountaineer uniform with the class and toughness that made him one of the school's all-time great linebackers.
I came to West Virginia 4 years ago, and I tell you, it's been the best 4 years of my life. The one thing I think that playing football for WVU has done for me, it has instilled discipline that I can carry over into my career and later on in my life.
In many ways, the 1991 West Virginia football season was a special and important one. The winning ways and the fighting spirit that characterized Mountaineer football were back. It will be hard to replace the leaders of this team. Names like Steve Grant, Jim Gray, John Ray, Michael Beasley, Tim Newsom, and many more. But these crafty veterans taught younger players what the Mountaineer tradition is all about. Underclassmen like Darren Studstill, Adrian Morrell, Mike Compton, Wes Richardson, Puppy Wright, and many others now have a firm foundation on which to continue the West Virginia tradition that they have been taught. It's a tradition that has carried on for 100 years, and the 91 celebration was a good example of how this program has endured behind pride and toughness. That tradition could shine brightly in 1992 because of the important lessons learned in 91. Lessons that will help these young men for the rest of their lives, because 1991 was a return to tradition. The 1991 West Virginia highlights were presented by United National Bank. This has been a presentation of the Mountaineer Sports Network.